I'd like to welcome everyone to the subcommittee meeting today of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia Subcommittee. And we're just very, very grateful for the witnesses we have today. And we're very grateful for the ranking member, Kathy Manning, from North Carolina, her service. And then we really are very fortunate that we have joining us today the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Mike McCall of Texas. And as we proceed, like every American, I watched in horror as innocent Afghan citizens fell from airplanes, crawled through sewage, and threw their infants over barbed wire fences attempting to escape following the Biden administration's surrender to the Taliban in August 2021. And sadly to me, this was the worst foreign policy decision, worst defense decision in the history of the United States. And the consequence we see today with the invitation to mass slaughter around the world. With that in mind, this example of appeasement was a devastating preview of the administration's foreign policy as we now see Iranian terrorist puppets fully empowered as war criminal Putin saw weakness and mercilessly launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and as the Chinese Communist Party dictatorship threatens the wonderful and free people of Taiwan. Biden broke his promise to those who had risked their lives in service to America and freedom from terrorism. There still are nearly 200 Americans remaining in Afghanistan, some being held hostage by the Taliban, and tens of thousands of Afghan partners and their families are living in fear. In September 2023, Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs Victoria Nuland told this committee that the Taliban are not committing reprisal attacks against Afghan allies. Sadly, and this is sad, we want bipartisan, the president to succeed on behalf of the American people, but sadly, what she said was not true. Last year, the UN documented over 200 Taliban reprisal killings. Experts have estimated that the true total is 10 times that amount. Often, family members of those killed by the Taliban learn of their loved one's murder through gruesome photos and videos that the Taliban sends them. Many former Afghan military members now living in the United States report receiving images of their spouses, children, siblings, and parents being butchered. With these photos and videos, the Taliban include a warning, quote, "Come back to Afghanistan or we will kill more of your family," end of quote. The Taliban's practice of reprisal killings is so well known among the Afghan and international community that Undersecretary Nuland cannot plead ignorance for her September comments. Her statement can only mean one thing. The administration is attempting to whitewash the Taliban malign actions in order to make their deadly withdrawal from Afghanistan look less disastrous and the Taliban less wicked. We know how the administration attempted to downplay the chaos of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan when 13 U.S. service members were murdered. And they were murdered despite the fact that we had a sniper who had the bomber in his sights, but he could not get the rules of engagement to dispatch the bomber, which resulted in 13 Americans killed and nearly 300 Afghanis killed. But we're still watching as they rewrite the reputation of the Taliban and help the Taliban to gain international legitimacy. At the United Nations, the United States has voted 15 times in 2023 to approve travel for sanctioned Taliban members, never once voting in opposition to the request. With help from the United States, Taliban members barred from travel toured the globe, stopping in Russia and China to attend international political conferences with war criminal Putin and the Chinese Communist Party. Afghanistan is once again a safe haven for terrorists. Reports indicate dozens of cells regrouping, some allied with the Taliban, some enemies of the Taliban, furthering complete destabilization and sadly making an attack on America and our allies imminent, with an attack here in the United States, as the FBI has indicated, an imminent attack, sadly, as we had with 9/11 and possibly many attacks here in the United States because of the safe haven of Afghanistan. With this administration's acquiescence, the Taliban is partnering with the Chinese Communist Party. Just last month, the Chinese Communist Party welcomed an ambassador from Afghanistan, making China the first country to recognize an ambassador appointed by the Taliban. The Chinese Communist Party aspirations in Afghanistan are so obvious: to enslave the country to their Belt and Road Initiative. In October 2023, the Taliban traveled to Beijing to attend China's Belt and Road Forum, where they announced their admission to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a staple of the Belt and Road Initiative. China is investing in Afghanistan's extractive industries, looking to capitalize on Afghanistan's oil and rare earth metals and minerals. And last year, a Chinese company developed a $1.5 billion deal with the Taliban. The administration's complicity to the partnership between the Chinese Communist Party and the Taliban, two of the world's most oppressive and evil dictatorships, is undeniable. Before this administration took office, Afghanistan enjoyed relative stability. Girls were free to go to school. The Afghan economy was stable. Terrorists didn't control the government. I know firsthand the achievements of the American military in the last 20 years, where they protected America in deterring terrorism. As my former National Guard unit, the South Carolina Army National Guard 218th National Infantry Brigade, National Guard Infantry Brigade, commanded by General Bob Livingston, was deploying across the country. And when I would visit them, my fellow Guard members would say how much they had such great appreciation of their Afghan brothers. Now those Afghan brothers are targets. I also treasure that my youngest son, First Lieutenant Hunter Wilson, served as an engineer in Afghanistan, developing a great appreciation for the people of Afghanistan. Since just 3 years, this administration watched as Afghanistan has become one of the world's most repressive countries, where women are enslaved, dictators have free reign, children go hungry, and our Afghan allies are hunted for sport. I look forward to hearing from each of you on your plan to fix the mess, the disaster that this administration has created. I yield back, and now I refer to Ranking Member Kathy Manning.
Thank you to my dear friend Chairman Wilson for calling this important hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today, Special Representative West, Special Envoy Amiri, and Assistant Administrator Schiffer. Thank you all for being here, for the important work that you do every day to advance our interests in Afghanistan and help the Afghan people. Since the fall of Kabul in August 2021, we have witnessed the tragic consequences of the Taliban's takeover of the Afghan people, the disaster that has occurred with human rights, and especially the rights of women and children. This reality, I'm eager to hear from our witnesses. Given this reality, I'm eager to hear from our witnesses about the administration's approach to Afghanistan and how we're facing the challenge of advancing our key U.S. national security and foreign policy priorities in Afghanistan without legitimizing or benefiting the Taliban. One of the most wrenching tragedies of the Taliban's rule has been the devastating impact on the women and girls of Afghanistan. Women who had high-ranking positions, who had good, productive jobs, who are no longer able to work. Girls who are attending school, who loved learning, who are preparing for the future, and are no longer able to get an education. I remember meeting with a group of these women before the Taliban's takeover. We asked them if they were trying to get out of the country. They told us no. They wanted to stay and fight for the soul of their country. I admired their courage and their determination, but I hate to think about what their lives are like today. Since taking power in 2021, the Taliban have introduced repressive controls on women and girls that restrict their movement and dress, prohibit them from going outside to public places, and limit girls' education beyond the 6th grade level. The Taliban have placed restrictions on women's opportunities to work, including banning Afghan women from working for the UN or NGOs. In response to the Taliban's edict, a significant number of NGOs paused operations and only resumed activities in certain areas where female staff have been allowed to operate. We must redouble our efforts to reverse the Taliban's draconian edicts and preserve a future for Afghan women and girls. Afghanistan has also faced a severe economic contraction that has exacerbated the country's humanitarian crisis. Despite successful international efforts last winter to surge food and other assistance to the country to stave off famine, Afghanistan continues to experience high rates of hunger and malnutrition. The UN's Afghanistan Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan estimates that in 2024, 15.8 million people will experience crisis and emergency levels of food insecurity. An estimated 23.7 million people, more than half of Afghanistan's population, are projected to require humanitarian assistance. Facing reduced international aid contributions, many Afghans remain in need of basic life-saving services, and we must not abandon them. As the single largest humanitarian aid donor in Afghanistan, the United States must continue to support the Afghan people with desperately needed humanitarian assistance so long as we have mechanisms in place to ensure that none of this aid unduly benefits the Taliban. I hope to hear from our witnesses about the impact of our assistance on the Afghan people and how we can ensure U.S. assistance goes directly to experienced and trusted partners, not the Taliban. And we must continue to engage with all partners necessary to help secure the release and return of wrongful detainees, advance human rights and economic opportunity, and ensure that Afghanistan will never again be used as a base to plan attacks against the U.S. or our allies. I applaud the administration's diplomatic efforts that have resulted in continued non-recognition of the Taliban as the legitimate government of Afghanistan and other efforts on human rights, counter-narcotics, and counter-terrorism. I would like to hear more from our witnesses about some of the serious challenges they face and the ways Congress can help with these important objectives. Finally, we must not abandon our Afghan allies who fought alongside American troops, served with our diplomats for more than 20 years. That's why we have welcomed more than 130,000 Afghans to the United States since August of 2021, and we must continue working to provide these resources to the program and help resettle more refugees. Congress should pass the Afghan Adjustment Act and ensure that adequate visas are allocated to the SIV program. Afghans face a brutal reality under the rule of the Taliban, but I hope that both this hearing and our collective efforts show that we have not and will never forget them. We must provide vital humanitarian assistance, increase our diplomatic efforts, and continue working to help advance our interests and improve the well-being, rights, and security of the Afghan people. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Kathy Manning. And indeed, your statements indicate it's bipartisan, our hopes for the people of Afghanistan, and we want to work together and work with the administration for the people of Afghanistan. We're really grateful that we now recognize the Chairman of the full committee, Chairman Mike McCall of Texas, for an opening statement, and I particularly appreciate Chairman Mike McCall's passion for exposing the worldwide threat of the Chinese Communist Party dictatorship. Chairman McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your leadership in holding this hearing as well. I first request unanimous consent to have a statement from David Kramer, the Executive Director at the George W. Bush Presidential Center, entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Following the U.S. withdrawal, Afghanistan is no better off today than when the United States first entered. After 20 years of blood and treasure, any progress made has been erased. This administration's deadly and chaotic withdrawal was ill-conceived from the very start. There were no plans to ensure enduring peace or to support the Afghan people. And now, under the administration's failed policies, Afghanistan continues to deteriorate every day. The Taliban are terrorists, even though they want us to take them off the list. Afghanistan continues to deteriorate every day. And contrary to what many in this administration think, they are no, quote, moderate, unquote, Taliban members. It appears the administration believes that befriending the Taliban, that they can influence their behavior. Yet the Taliban's own action has proved they cannot. Today, Afghan women and girls are worse off at any point since the United States withdrawal. In fact, worse, the 20-year-olds who never lived under Sharia law are now under that dark cloud, that dark veil. They're barred from public places. They're not allowed to travel outside of their homes without a male chaperone. And Afghanistan is the only country in the world where girls are banned from receiving an education above the 6th grade level. Taliban are funding, equipping, and providing safe haven to terrorist groups, including al-Qaeda. The $7 billion of military equipment left behind during the withdrawal is sold by the Taliban and used by terror groups and other American adversaries around the world. Mr. Zawahiri, the then leader of al-Qaeda, was living in downtown Kabul under the protection of the leader of the Haqqani network, who is now the Taliban's Minister of the Interior, or in other words, the Minister of Security, is now the Haqqani network leader who harbored the #2 deputy to Osama bin Laden. You can't make this up. The connection is real, and you can't change the truth. Facts are stubborn things. Currently, at least 6 million Americans are held captive by the Taliban. There are more Americans detained by the Taliban right now than at any point in the last 2 years. And one of those Americans is Ryan Corbett, whose wife Anna testified before this committee last November. He's been captive in Afghanistan since August 2022. Right now, the Taliban is hunting down our Afghan allies, partners, using our biometrics door to door, checking their fingerprints. They torture them, they kill them with the same weapons that this administration left behind for their use to murder. And now the Taliban are benefiting more than ever from U.S. taxpayer dollars, which they steal from NGOs to enrich their fighters and solidify their power. The Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, more commonly known as SIGAR, testified to the committee in November of last year that the Taliban is, quote, stealing and benefiting from humanitarian aid, that they're demanding payoffs from NGOs. They will not hire women. They are diverting aid favorable to beneficiaries such as their own fighters. They are creating fake NGOs in order to receive humanitarian aid. They are embedding Taliban intelligence officials within UN agencies. Obviously, by failing to treat the Taliban as a threat they are, this administration has not disengaged their malign activity. Instead, they have emboldened them. For example, this administration has repeatedly voted at the UN to grant travel ban waivers to sanctioned Taliban members. And all the while, the administration is hiding from accountability. SIGAR also testified the State Department is the least cooperative they have ever engaged with since the establishment of their office in 2008. That's quite a statement. And according to SIGAR, the State Department has failed to respond to at least 30 outstanding requests for information. Some of those have been pending for over a year. This is simply unacceptable. It's time for the administration to reevaluate their policy priorities, which have clearly achieved so little in Afghanistan. They need to focus on developing a strategy that will ensure the U.S. is not supporting the Taliban, but rather innocent Afghans. Anything less sends a failure of American leadership. We want to help the people of Afghanistan. Half of them are at the poverty level, starving, but we don't want to fund the Taliban either. And it's the job of this committee to provide the oversight to ensure, and SIGAR as well, to ensure that this does not happen in the future. And let me just say, with respect to the chairman's words, The saddest thing is the women left behind under the veil, the dark cloud of Sharia law, but also the fact that guess who's in Afghanistan today? China. They're exploiting the rare earth minerals, and I wouldn't be surprised if one day we woke up and guess who's going to take over Bagram Air Base? That was a crown jewel of our ISR capability for that region that we turned over to the Taliban. I wouldn't be surprised, Mr. Chairman, if one day we woke up and we find the CCP operating that precious jewel that we had in Afghanistan, Bagram Air Base. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And we now proceed and want to welcome our distinguished witnesses today. Thomas West, the Special Representative for Afghanistan and Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs at the State Department. We also have Ms. Rina Amiri, the U.S. Special Envoy for Afghan Women, Girls, and Human Rights at the State Department. And finally, we have Honorable Michael Schiffer, the Assistant Administrator of the Bureau for Asia for the United States Agency of International Development. I want to thank you for being here today. Your full statements will be made part of the record, and I'll ask that each of you keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow time for members to ask questions. I now recognize Mr. West for his opening statement.
Chairman McCall, Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Manning, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to discuss the Biden-Harris administration's Afghanistan policy. I would like to acknowledge the many Americans who served and sacrificed in Afghanistan since 2001, including members of this committee. Almost 800,000 people deployed to Afghanistan over the course of our 20-year commitment. Over 2,400 American service members died from combat and non-combat causes in Afghanistan. Many thousands of diplomats, development workers, other civilians, and contractors also served, and some paid the ultimate sacrifice. In the 2 years since the United States and our allies completed our military withdrawal from Afghanistan, the Biden administration's policy has focused on advancing and protecting American interests and continuing to support the Afghan people. In my remarks today, I will focus on where we stand in terms of our national interests, the enormous challenges that Afghans face today, and the path ahead. Our most critical enduring interest in Afghanistan is to ensure that it never again becomes a launching pad for terrorist attacks against the United States or our allies. We have reorganized our counterterrorism capabilities to monitor and to prevent the reemergence of terrorist threats from Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda's ability to threaten the United States from Afghanistan or Pakistan is at a low point since the group relocated from Sudan in 1996. Al-Qaeda's low capability is the result of successful counterterrorism action by the United States and its allies over 20 years. The Taliban's sheltering of Al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri in a safe house in Kabul was a flagrant violation of their security commitments. Since then, we assess that the Taliban have undertaken efforts to fulfill their security commitments with regard to Al-Qaeda. The terrorist group whose capabilities and intent concern us the most in Afghanistan is the Islamic State branch there, Islamic State Khorasan Province, or ISIS-K. ISIS-K harbors clear intent to launch external attacks, and we monitor their capabilities and planning vigilantly. U.S. citizens are currently being wrongfully detained by the Taliban, and we are working actively to secure their release. During my time as Special Representative for Afghanistan, and with the help of colleagues such as Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs Roger Carstens, we have successfully returned several U.S. citizens held by the Taliban to their families. We remain in close contact with the families of U.S. citizens held by the Taliban. Securing the release of these Americans is among the administration's highest priorities in any engagement with Taliban representatives. The humanitarian and economic crises in Afghanistan are staggering in scope, and addressing Afghans' urgent needs is a policy priority. With thanks to Congress for its support, the United States has been the leading provider of humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan, contributing more than $2 billion since August 2021. That assistance has reached millions of Afghans, helped to improve food security, and addressed urgent needs after natural disasters. All U.S. assistance to Afghanistan is channeled through UN bodies, international financial institutions, and international and local NGOs, not the Taliban. My USAID colleague, Assistant Administrator Schiffer, can speak to our rigorous oversight mechanisms in greater detail. As we seek to address the urgent needs of all Afghans, we are reminded daily that nowhere in the world are women and girls more repressed than in Afghanistan. This is the result of reprehensible Taliban policies. Our policy in Afghanistan prioritizes the centrality of respect for human rights, and particularly of women and girls' rights, to Afghanistan's future stability and prosperity. We have emphasized to the Taliban that the normalization they seek is unreachable without a radical shift in their human rights conduct, in particular their treatment of half of the population. That is why Secretary Blinken appointed my colleague, Rina Amiri, as Special Envoy for Afghan women, girls, and human rights. We continue to enable and support the resettlement of Afghans who worked alongside us during our 20-year presence in the country. This effort is led by the Office of the Coordinator for Afghan Relocation Efforts inside the State Department, and it is one that Congress has likewise strongly supported. We are grateful for it. Across these priorities, we have sought to build consensus within the international community regarding our collective interests vis-à-vis changes in Taliban conduct. We support UN Security Council Resolution 2721 and the recommendation of UN Special Coordinator Sinerlioglu for the appointment of a UN envoy to Afghanistan. Such an envoy should develop a roadmap that outlines Taliban delivery on international priorities in return for steps toward normalization. Thank you for your time today, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. West. And now we recognize Ms. Amiri for her opening statement.
Chairman McCall, Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Manning, distinguished committee members, thank you for the opportunity to speak today about the devastating human rights situation in Afghanistan, particularly the extreme restrictions against Afghan women and girls, and for your sustained bipartisan support. I will be summarizing my written statement. When I assumed the position of Special Envoy for Afghan women, girls, and human rights in January 2022, I knew that it would be a difficult undertaking, and that despite the Taliban's rhetoric promising to respect the rights of all Afghans, the struggle to ensure respect for human rights, particularly for the rights of women and girls, would be an uphill battle. Unfortunately, that assessment has borne devastatingly true. In the last 2 years, the human rights situation in Afghanistan has severely deteriorated. Members of ethnic and religious minority communities, particularly Hazaras, are exposed to escalating threats and violence. Media freedom has been drastically curtailed, and vulnerable groups live in a state of peril. Restrictions against women and girls have been the most extreme. The Taliban have systemically targeted Afghan women and girls with more than 50 discriminatory edicts at the national level and many more at the subnational level. They have attempted to erase Afghan women and girls from society, revoking girls' access to education beyond the primary level, limiting women's employment, and depriving them of the opportunity to put food on the table. They've restricted freedom of movement for women and effectively removed them from public spaces. Those who have raised their voices have faced harassment, detention, and violence at the hands of the Taliban. Given the Taliban's track record and extreme ideology, the road ahead continues to look extremely challenging. Yet, even as we acknowledge these difficulties, we must remain resolute and support Afghan women and girls. If we do not continue to stand up for the rights of Afghan women, we put at peril women's rights everywhere. To address these challenges, my work focuses on 5 key areas. First, we support human rights and Afghan women through our diplomacy with our partners and allies and in our dialogue with the Taliban. We underscore that the United States will not support steps toward normalization with the Taliban unless there is a profound and meaningful shift towards respecting the rights of all Afghans, particularly women and girls. We also make it clear to the Taliban that women's rights and human rights are central to U.S. policy towards Afghanistan and will not be deprioritized or siloed. Second, we ensure that support for Afghan women and girls is not an effort just led by Western countries, but that it is a global effort championed by the region, particularly Muslim majority countries. Third, We recognize the importance of including and amplifying the voices of Afghan women themselves and injecting their expertise and their perspectives into U.S. and international policymaking. Since we established the U.S.-Afghan Consultative Mechanism, we have held approximately 200 consultations with Afghan women in civil society, including high-level meetings with senior U.S. and international leaders. Fourth, in coordinating with our interagency and department partners, we mobilize resources to advance education and economic resilience for women and girls, including virtual education programs and job skills training for Afghan women and girls inside and outside Afghanistan. To that end, my office launched the Alliance for Afghan Women's Economic Resilience and have efforts underway to support millions of Afghan women with access to virtual education opportunities and employment support. And fifth, we support protection and accountability measures through sustained work with the UN human rights instruments, as well as Afghan and international human rights organizations. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to speak with you on these important matters, and I look forward to continuing to engage Congress as we support Afghans, particularly women and girls, in their valiant struggle for their rights. We are under no illusion about the challenges ahead, but we must at least match the resilience and determination of Afghans themselves. Supporting human rights, particularly the rights of women and girls, offers the best prospect for an inclusive, secure, and stable Afghanistan at peace with itself and its neighbors. The Afghans we invest in today will determine the Afghanistan of the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Amiri. I now recognize Mr. Schiffer for his opening statement.
Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Manning, Chairman McCall, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today on USAID's efforts to deliver basic needs and humanitarian assistance to the most vulnerable people in Afghanistan. Consistent with U.S. national security objectives, our efforts over the past 2+ years have prevented economic collapse, have averted wide-scale famine, and have ensured that the health system continues to deliver basic services to the Afghan people. USAID's development model demonstrates our enduring commitment to the people of Afghanistan, to U.S. values, and stands in sharp contrast to the Taliban, whose values and methods could not be further from our own, especially when it comes to the rights of women and girls. We believe that not only do we have a moral obligation to support the people of Afghanistan, but it is also in our national security interest to do so, and to ensure that Afghanistan's ongoing humanitarian and economic crises do not worsen. And we are clear-eyed about the very challenging environment in which we operate in Afghanistan. The Taliban's takeover and subsequent draconian edicts have eroded decades of development goals, have increased economic security, and have diminished basic services. Today, half the country's population lives in poverty, and women and girls face increasing marginalization. To have an impact in this environment, we have a highly adaptive and flexible strategic framework to respond nimbly while aligning with the U.S. government's broader foreign policy priorities. We engage with a wide range of partners to support basic needs in education, health, livelihoods, and agriculture, and to work where we can to give people a voice through independent media and to support vulnerable populations, especially Afghan women and girls. For example, consistent with humanitarian principles, we ensure that women are involved throughout the assistance delivery cycle, including delivering and receiving assistance. Where this cannot be done, our partners often voluntarily suspend operations until a solution is found. Fortunately, we have managed to find workarounds to support women and girls in Afghanistan. For instance, in the past 2 years, we've worked to provide private sector employment for more than 7,000 women in the carpet, cashmere, and saffron industries. We've helped 15,000 women farmers grow staple crops, such as fruits and vegetables, with private sector support and deliver those crops to market. We've incorporated telementoring for Afghan health workers, including midwives and women doctors. And our science and math lessons on YouTube have been downloaded more than 13,000 times so far. Since the Taliban takeover in August 2021, the United States has provided approximately $2 billion in humanitarian assistance to support the Afghan people amid the country's ongoing humanitarian crisis, including more than $1.4 billion from USAID, that focuses on food assistance, health, and nutrition services for communities in the greatest need. This humanitarian assistance complements more than $700 million in additional basic needs assistance. Because we are clear-eyed about the operating environment in Afghanistan and about Taliban intent, we remain extremely vigilant against attempts to divert and interfere with assistance delivery. USAID takes its duty as a steward of U.S. taxpayer dollars extremely seriously, and we hold implementing partners to the highest standards to ensure that funds are used wisely, effectively, and for their intended purposes. We cooperate with all oversight bodies, including Congress, our own Inspector General, and the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan, SIGAR, to protect against fraud, waste, and abuse. Beyond our standard rigorous controls and assurances common to all USAID programs, we use independent third-party monitoring to provide additional levels of oversight on the ground. We also require our partners to have robust safeguards, risk mitigation systems, and reporting procedures in place to ensure that development and humanitarian assistance reaches those who are in most need. While our partners have reported ad hoc attempted diversion and interference, which we make sure that when those attempts are made, we place due diligence on our programs, and that includes temporary suspension of activities and other responses to ensure that we are able to continue to deliver assistance to intended families in principled ways. USAID does not provide assistance to or through Taliban authorities. We continually analyze the operational environment to prevent and mitigate risks of fraud, diversion, and abuse, and to ensure that USAID assistance does not reach the Taliban. The situation in Afghanistan continues to pose serious challenges. However, we are mindful that when we withdrew our assistance for 3 months in 2021, Afghanistan veered to the brink of famine and the potential for chaos that would have placed U.S. national security interests at risk. Without our engagement, for example, the only healthcare and education that women and girls in Afghanistan would be allowed to have would be what the Taliban would provide. That cause and effect is clear. As such, USAID remains steadfast in our support to the people of Afghanistan and our pragmatic approach to providing assistance. We welcome continued cooperation with Congress and this committee in those efforts, and appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your advice, your counsel, and to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schiffer. We now, as an indication of how important what you're doing and how important this hearing is, our first questions will indeed be from Chairman Mike McCall, Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just say first, I recognize the challenge. It's almost impossible to put money or assistance or aid into Afghanistan without the Taliban taking a cut. They are de facto in operational control, along with some factions of al-Qaeda. And I sincerely appreciate how difficult this mission must be. But Mr. West, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan testified before this committee that the State Department is, quote, the least cooperative that he has seen in his 12 years. There are 30 outstanding requests from SIGAR, which the State Department is refusing to respond to. I have their letter right here that I'd like to enter into the record, Mr. Chairman. Some of these requests are over a year old, and half of them are simple document requests, which the State Department could easily fulfill today. Will you commit to this committee and to SIGAR to respond to these 30 outstanding requests this month?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a chance to sit down with Mr. Sopko last week, and we talked about the continuing cooperation of the State Department with SIGAR. I have to say, his statements before this committee caught us by surprise because they were inconsistent with the October quarterly report that he issued, noting that the State Department is collaborating well with SIGAR. What I'd tell you is that between August 2021 and today, we estimate that roughly 13,000 staff hours have been devoted at the State Department to cooperating with SIGAR. There are pieces of my team, Mr. Chairman. Their entire job is to focus on SIGAR. There are elements of other parts of the Bureau whose entire job is focused on supporting the work of SIGAR. So it's incredibly time-consuming. We respect the oversight role that SIGAR has, and we'll continue to work closely with them. As for the specific 30 outstanding requests, I wish I had looked at them before this hearing. I'd be happy to take a look at them personally.
Well, I would encourage you to. Probably should have done your homework on that, but I would ask you to respond to that, though. If you would respond to me and the committee with respect to the 30 outstanding requests, that would be helpful. Secondly, as you know, this committee is investigating the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. We've had now a very, got the number of transcribed interviews, but there's quite a few. Some have to do with the Doha Agreement itself. I know you were involved with that, Mr. West, with Mr. Khalizad, or you were actually deputy to Khalizad, is that correct?
I was not a part of negotiating the Doha
You're not part
agreement.
of the Doha?
No, that was the last administration. I started the day after the president was inaugurated.
Well, we've heard testimony that while there were conditions attached to that agreement, that the president decided to withdraw those conditions from the Doha agreement. Do you know anything about that?
I know there was a lot of back and forth between the staff of the State Department and this committee before this hearing. I'm hoping we focus today on U.S. policy toward Afghanistan following the withdrawal, as is consistent with the title of the testimony.
Do you know whether the conditions set forth in the Doha agreement had any bearing on President Biden's decision to withdraw?
Mr. Chairman, I know there was a lot of back and forth between the staff of the State Department and this committee before we sat down today. It's really our hope to focus on current U.S. policy vis-a-vis Afghanistan and not the withdrawal.
Well, it's a duty of this committee to look at oversight as to past policies of the State Department when it came to the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which then led to aggression from Russia, China, and Iran. Did you have any discussions with Zal Khalizad about the Doha agreement?
I'm very hopeful that the bulk of this hearing will focus on
I'm asking you
US
if you
policy.
had any discussion.
But I'm happy to answer your question.
Did you?
So, you know, of course, the Doha Agreement came up during the first 8 months of my time in this job, in my former title as the Deputy Special Representative.
So the answer is yes, you did. Maybe you can provide. My time's going to expire. Provide to me a summary of those discussions, and then perhaps we will meet with you separately on this matter. But lastly, did you have any discussions with either Mr. Sullivan, Jake Sullivan, or the President of the United States regarding the Doha agreement pertaining to the Taliban?
No.
Okay. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We now proceed to Ranking Member Kathy Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all our witnesses for your testimony and for your service to our country. Ms. Amiri, after years of progress, I'm appalled at the Taliban's brutal and despicable treatment of women and girls. Civil society and media organizations have crumbled, with anyone openly speaking in opposition to the Taliban's rules facing serious threats and violence. Women and girls are treated like property, unable to work or even move freely in public without their husbands or male relatives. And I was struck by one story of a young woman, a former government employee, who was beaten by her husband in front of her children and is too afraid to report this violence to the authorities. She said, and I quote, "I have never felt so alone. Many times I have decided to end my life, but I think about the fate of my son. Deprivations of the right to work and education have severely affected mental problems and created depression. Imagine a generation in depression. This generation will be the mothers of the future. The children of hopeless and depressed people are dangerous for the future of Afghanistan." And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to request unanimous consent to enter her full story into the record.
Admitted without any objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Amiri, I am deeply concerned that systemic discrimination against Afghan women has led many, like this young woman, into depression and in some cases even suicide. What are we doing to reverse these repressive edicts, sideline hardliners in the Taliban, and avert the most desperate outcomes?
Thank you very much, Representative Manning. I share your heartbreak over the devastating situation in Afghanistan. I have also been speaking with Afghan women over the course of the last 2 years and have heard the same type of heartbreaking stories. The mental health crisis in Afghanistan is severe, and it is a context in which Afghan women tell me of the desperation that they are under, the fact that protection mechanisms that were in place have been stripped from the country, and that they feel that they are under virtual prison. What we are doing, first I want to just make absolutely clear that we condemn the Taliban. We have condemned them publicly, we have condemned them privately, and we have mobilized the international community to make it very clear to the Taliban that so long as they engage in the human rights abuses that they are conducting against the Afghan population and women, there will be no movement forward in normalization, and that they will continue to be a pariah in the international community. This is something that we've made clear to the Taliban, but in addition to our diplomatic work, we are also working on concrete efforts. With the Afghan Women's Economic Resilience Initiative, one of the areas we are looking at is mental health support. And my colleague at USAID can also speak to some of the efforts that they're undertaking in this regard.
Certainly, and thank you for that, and thank you for the question, Representative Manning. It's an extraordinarily important part of the focus of our work to seek to address the needs of Afghan women and girls during what is an extraordinarily challenging and dispiriting era of Afghanistan's history. We have sought to work creatively where we can. And where we see openings and opportunity to be able to meet basic needs and to address livelihoods and other humanitarian needs. We have managed, for example, over the past couple of years to create more than 7,000 jobs for women in the cashmere, carpet, and saffron industries, working with private sector, through private sector partners. We have managed to support 15,000 women farmers to grow strategic crops, fruits and vegetables, and get them to market. As Special Envoy Amiri has commented on, we have supported distance learning programs that have provided some access to education for Afghan girls. And we've managed to work in the healthcare industry, particularly training women doctors and midwives to be able to meet those needs as well. It is challenging. It is not easy. It requires all of our creativity and all of the creativity of our partners, but we are doing our level best to make sure that even under these circumstances, Afghan women and girls are not left behind.
Thank you. I have 20 more questions, but my time has expired, so I will yield back to make room for my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Manning. And of course, I look forward to your questions being submitted at a later time, which is part of our rules that we will be very happy to provide them. And again, as we proceed, I now will recognize myself. And in my opening statement, I mentioned how grateful I was that I had the opportunity to have the service of the South Carolina Army National Guard, led by Adjutant General Bob Livingston, with my youngest son, Hunter Taylor Wilson, as an engineer in Afghanistan. And I saw the country evolve. The first time I went there, it was total rubble. There was no traffic. There was really just one lane of traffic with rubble everywhere. And the consequence of the Soviet murderous occupation, which achieved nothing except mass slaughter of the people of Afghanistan. With that, though, then I saw a hopeful society developing. And Ms. Amiri, it was just so inspiring to see little girls with white scarves, freely walking to school, little guys walking along with baseball caps to school. And it was just really inspiring. And then, Mr. Schiffer, one of the most inspiring things that I saw in a very remote area of the country was a sign directing where a school was located. It was a rusty sign. It had a hand clasp of the U.S. and Afghan flag together, showing together. And if people didn't appreciate it, as I mentioned, it was rusty. They had every opportunity to take it down. But there was a lot of pride, and that's why, to me, the surrender is more horrific, because I saw what our military did. I saw what our allies did of Korea, 40 to 50 different countries, meeting with troops from Bulgaria. Over and over again, our British allies, so much was done to be abandoned. And that's why, sadly to me, on August 26, 2021, the President made a really sad speech explaining America's surrender, and he claimed that military leaders supported his decision, and he added a phrase, and he had letters, end of quote. And that night, I respectfully sent a letter to the President requesting copies of the letters he claimed. On numerous occasions, and again today, I will be sending a letter asking for copies of the letters, because we've never received a response. And that's an insult to our military, to military families, and to the American people. And it just needs to be answered. This is just so important that it's inexcusable with the progress that Americans and the lives lost, but the progress that was made to abandon it based on letters that have never been revealed. With that, Mr. West, following the surrender to the Taliban in Afghanistan, there were reports that indicated rapid resurgence of terrorist groups operating in the safe haven of Afghanistan. Do you have an assessment of the number of recognized terrorist organizations and offshoot groups? And hey, we know they change their name every day, so please, how many different groups are there? And hey, there's some who are Taliban supportive and some not, but hey, they all have a goal, okay? It's death to America. And so what are we doing? What are they?
Yeah. The group we, Mr. Chairman, the group we worry most about is ISIS-K, the ISIS offshoot in Afghanistan. Just in the days leading up to the fall of the Republic, the Taliban, I think unbeknownst to them, but they opened up some jail cells and allowed some 1,800 of ISIS-K fighters released. They rejoined ranks, and we saw throughout much of 2022 devastating attacks against Afghan civilians, and particularly the Shia population. That is a group that harbors clear intent to attack foreign countries. I think you probably saw that ISIS-K claimed responsibility for the attack that took place in Iran. We have no reason to doubt that claim of responsibility. They have launched attacks against Tajikistan and also against Uzbekistan. And they have, as I said, ambition to strike the United States and the West as well. So we worry about that group. When it comes to al-Qaeda, as I said in my opening statement, they're at their lowest operational capability since 1996. That's also true of AQIS. We believe that they have a very low operational capability. TTP, this group that is based in Afghanistan, but really has seen an uptick in attacks on Pakistani forces. I'm very worried about that group. It's something I spoke about with Pakistani leaders when I visited last month. You know, for regional stability and for our own interests and Pakistan's stability, we should hope for concerted efforts to eliminate that group inside Afghanistan.
And indeed, Pakistan, I've been to Islamabad, I've been Muzaffarabad. Hey, Pakistan has been, over the years, a country that we've worked with closely for them to be a positive development. But as you identified, but I'm concerned about al-Qaeda itself, and that is the perpetrators of mass murder at the World Trade Center in Pennsylvania, at the Pentagon. Al-Qaeda currently, is this correct, has 2 provincial governors, a deputy director of intelligence, a directorate, and several Ministry of Defense personnel. Is that true that al-Qaeda is that positioned in the government?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Well, please look into that, because that's the reports we've gotten. And then I'm equally concerned how bizarre this is, the Afghan Central Bank Board of Directors included 3 Taliban members who were sanctioned by the United Nations, including the board's director and deputy director. How can we count on Afghan funds being transferred to the people and but being diverted to support a dictatorial regime?
Mr. Chairman, that's accurate that there are pieces of the leadership of the central bank that are sanctioned Taliban members. And, that is why, among many other reasons, we think it would be deeply irresponsible to seek to recapitalize the Afghan central bank. That is why we do not work through the Taliban in the delivery of aid.
It's bipartisan. Hey, we want you to succeed. But the thought of the different aid programs going to a dictatorial regime, an authoritarian regime, the money's fungible. And so every effort should be made. Now, we're very fortunate to have, as I mentioned, bipartisan. We've been joined by the ranking member of the full committee, Congressman Meeks of New York. And so, Congressman Greg Meeks would be happy to recognize you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you. From the great state of South Carolina.
You're here.
I want to thank you, Chairman, again for convening this very important hearing, and I'm glad that this committee will give us the opportunity to discuss Afghanistan policy with members of the administration tasked with the policy's implementation, which is really important. And let me start off by thanking also all of our witnesses for their appearance and your work that you've done in a tireless manner on behalf of the American people. When I look at what you do on a regular basis, to me, oftentimes those who do the type of policy work that you do, the State Department, is always underappreciated. And I want to take this opportunity to really thank you for your work and what you do on a regular basis. And last, and I had stated in our full committee hearing last November, I believe it was, that I clearly, and I think where we are in a bipartisan manner, are not under any illusions about who or what the Taliban is. I think that's something that we are all very clear on. But I also believe that we have to be very strategic about how we pursue our goals in a uniquely challenging environment, when you have that kind of environment that we're confronted with, and how we engage where it serves our interests and helps the people of Afghanistan and our foreign policy for the people of the United States of America. So, and what I'm trying to do, and I want to make sure that I'm clear, that I am especially concerned about the impact of the Taliban's control over Afghanistan, particularly on women and girls of that country. That is something that is very, very important to me. And I know, and I've been an advocate for a review and being comprehensive about the entire 20-year period that we were in Afghanistan under each and every administration, from the Obama administration through the Trump administration and, of course, the Biden administration. But I know that it was, during the Trump administration when the Doha Agreement was made, and administration officials at that time suggested to Congress that the Taliban's views on women and girls had changed. Clearly that is not. And though that there have been some small spaces that were created for women and girls in Afghanistan, the Taliban has dramatically curtailed their freedom, so that I don't think that there's any question of that. So I guess the question I have for any of you is, what drives the Taliban's leadership to continue to place these limitations on the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan? And within those constructs, where do you see the potential opportunity to advance the rights of women and girls in the country as we speak?
Thank you, Representative Meeks. If I might take that question. And thank you for putting the situation of women and girls in the spotlight. It is the worst situation in the world. There's no country in the world that deprives girls of education beyond the secondary level. And it is a situation that we have called attention to in all of our public statements at every level of our leadership. In terms of what drives the Taliban would like to make the claim that this is based on religious grounds or cultural grounds. Those have been countered both by Muslim-majority countries who have said that this is contrary to the practices of any Islamic country, and it has also been countered by the Afghan population that have roundly condemned the practices of the Taliban. And men and women, tribal communities, elders, families, fathers have said they want their daughters educated and they want them to be able to have the opportunity to work. Afghanistan is a country that is driven more by pragmatism than by ideology, and certainly not the extreme ideology that the Taliban present. The ways that we support Afghan women and girls is, first, we amplify the voices of Afghan women themselves. They are their best advocates. They are their strongest advocates. Not only do we amplify their voices through our mechanisms, such as the U.S.-Afghan Consultative Mechanism, but we encourage every country that is working on Afghanistan to and make sure that they include Afghan women when they are engaging on the situation of Afghanistan. We encourage everyone to tell the Taliban publicly and privately in very emphatic terms that so long as they continue these practices, there will be no movement forward in normalization of relations. And finally, we believe that it's absolutely critical to empower Afghans themselves, who are going to be ultimately the force that will change these policies. Because the Taliban can say that they're going to ignore the international community. They cannot ignore the Afghan people. The people that we invested in for the last 2 decades are still the people that we need to invest in today. And with that, I'll turn to my colleague.
Thank you. I'm out of time, but thank you for your questions. Your answers, I should say. We appreciate your work.
Thank you very much, Congressman Greg Meeks, and the ranking member. We're so grateful. We are both proud natives of South Carolina, but he's really done well. He represents Queens, and so we're really proud of that success of Greg Meeks. We now proceed to Congressman Dr. Rich McCormick of Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As an Afghan veteran, I would openly state that I think our withdrawal from Afghanistan was an abject failure and probably the worst in our history. I'm a history teacher of evolutionary warfare here in the United States and amphibious warfare, and so as a student of the game, I think we've dissected that enough. So I'm going to move on to some of the more germane things that I'm worried about here and that apply to your experiences. According to the January 5th Reuters article, ISIS, based in Afghanistan, was responsible for the most recent suicide bombings in Iran that killed nearly 100 people. In addition to that, we have well-documented instances of how the Afghan Taliban are treating their female population, which we're all abhorred by. Reports are that the Taliban have harbored ISIS and al-Qaeda leaders since our withdrawal, and of course we know there are easily over 20 terrorist bases for training in Afghanistan that we know of. All that said, in October, we looked at the Afghanistan government and announced its plan to become formally part of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative and request to become part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Obviously bad players. Now the Taliban, though, according to my information, the CIGAR testified in November that 37 NGOs reported that they provided a total of $10.1 million in taxes and fees to the Taliban. That's from us. The problem I have with the way that we're running our coordination with the CIGAR is that when Mr. West, when you said, I think, and I quote, al-Qaeda is at their lowest capability in Afghanistan in decades, which I heard when I first came in, all those things I just stated are still true. And it doesn't diminish the fact that they are actually building a presence that's literally in contrast to every single thing we're trying to achieve, both in Afghanistan and globally in our strategic initiatives, in my opinion. And the other thing that you said, I think, and I'm not going to paraphrase on this, but that you did an excellent job in responding to the cigar responses to their questions. But I think there's a big difference between a response and being responsive. And I want to go over a couple things that have been presented to me as evidence of what I think is in contrary to what you just stated. We have 30 outstanding requests for information by the state that you have yet to fully comply with, which affects the ability of the cigar to accomplish their initiatives. The state's rationale for not providing this information seems unreasonable to me, at least. In some cases, blatantly absurd because it suggests the desire to obstruct the cigar itself, and that it seems to be coming from our own State Department. I don't understand what that purpose is or why we're not complying with something that literally inhibiting them to be able to get information that's unclassified to do their job. Why would we possibly have a reason to obstruct the very agency that we appointed to get to the bottom of the problem? Why would we work against ourselves for accountability? It makes no sense to me. I think that when we talk about this frivolous rationale that was used by the state to justify this delays in responsiveness, they even used the Freedom of Information Act exemption to justify withholding information from the auditor. That makes no sense to me, and I'd like your response on that in a second. I'm gonna pile on here. I only have 5 minutes. I got to get this all out. But basically, I didn't understand also why the department has now placed the restrictions on the unclassified information, everything else. I don't understand. We have an obviously bad actor. We have an accountability agent. We're giving money to bad actors. And then the state is literally saying, I don't want you to have the response you need or the information you need to do your job. Can you respond?
Thank you. These are important questions. So first, I'll offer an example of the kind of concern we have. We don't want any information about our implementing partners out there in the public domain that's going to put a target on them inside Afghanistan.
When you say implementing partners, what are you referring to?
I'm not going to get into specifics about exactly which the organizations we rely on to deliver humanitarian aid. So SIGAR has a job, right? And
like USAID?
We respect. But we want to be sure that if they want to talk directly to our implementing partners, that they respect the absolute sensitivity of that information. Because if they publish it, the Taliban can read, and they can then target those organizations for their activity. That's one example. You know, as I said to the chairman, I'll look into these 30 outstanding requests. It's a fair question. Let me turn to my colleague on this question as well.
Certainly, just to add to what Special Representative West offered, you know, we fully agree with the importance of oversight and accountability for all of our work. We are fully cooperating with SIGAR. We've had something like 370 engagements with SIGAR over the past year or so. I will get you the exact number. We have teams here in Washington and with our Afghan Affairs unit overseas that are dedicated to producing material in response to all of their questions and doing so in a production schedule that both we and SIGAR find workable. As the Special Representative offered, there have been times when we've had to negotiate out some of the questions where we have concerns because of the potential risk that the provision of certain information would create for the Afghan people. We've been able to do that successfully, but sometimes that has resulted in a process that's been slower than we're satisfied with, and certainly than I think at times SIGAR has been satisfied with. But I've met with Mr. Sopko, as my colleague has, several times, had very good positive conversations, and we are doing our utmost, given how important it is for us to be responsible to the American taxpayer, to make sure that we are providing SIGAR with all of the information that it needs so that it can help us do our job better and help support this committee as well.
So I'm out of time. I'm just going to make the statement that you and the SIGAR have a different opinion of the experience you're having with each other. And I think that's important to note, that if the one accountability agency we have that represents us, the people if you will, and our representatives. If they're not satisfied, that means we're not satisfied. So I hope we do a better job.
Thank you, Dr. Rich McCormick. We now proceed to Congressman Brad Sherman of California.
Picking up on what the gentleman from Georgia said, I think he's entitled to answers if they can't be provided publicly. Mr. Schiffer, will you give him or the full subcommittee a classified briefing answering his questions?
Certainly be happy to come up and talk to the committee. I can assure you that we have been able to provide Mr. Sopko with and his.
We have several SCIFs right in this building.
Yeah, no, we have been able to provide him with responses to all of the questions.
Good, we're reclaiming my time. I've got to let we went to Afghanistan to get bin Laden. We got him. We would have gotten him sooner if we hadn't focused too much on Iraq. We are prepared to take whatever military action is necessary in Afghanistan to prevent it from being a source of a mass casualty attack on the United States. So far, the various forces in Afghanistan seem to be more focused on killing each other. We went to Afghanistan for a second reason, one we never voted on, and that was to seek to remake Afghanistan society. Historians will have to tell us whether that was ever possible to do. Clearly, we failed to do it. We then had a President Trump who promised the American people that we'd get out of what he classified as a forever war. He was clever in that he gave the promise of the withdrawal before the election, intending to do the withdrawal after the election, because there's no such thing as an orderly withdrawal under those circumstances. We did not have an orderly withdrawal from Saigon. Our military complex told us we'd have an orderly withdrawal because they believed that since the Afghan army could fight the Taliban successfully for 3 to 6 months, that they would, which is absurd to think that the average grunt in the Afghan army is going to lay down his life while the leaders of the country and those most connected to the United States are trying desperately to leave Afghanistan. So, of course, there was a disorderly withdrawal, and then we have the attacks from the other side saying somehow we should have gone through Afghanistan, an enormous country, and taken our weapons back from the people who wanted to continue holding them, but do it all with no American casualties. So we left. We now have, and one have failed to acknowledge, that we have very limited power at all. We care more about the Afghan people and the Taliban, certainly the half of the Afghan people who are women. We can threaten to cut off aid. The Taliban may not care at all. We could bomb Taliban military targets, but I think that's absurd. The United States is not in a mood to do that. We are told that we're going to make them a pariah in the international community, but they've got no reason or little reason to care. And China and Russia is certainly part of the international community, and they'll be very happy to do business with the Taliban. We have seen our aid interrupted because, or might be interrupted because we know it's being stolen. I'll point to Tigray, where our aid was being stolen by criminals. And we didn't like to see that. We interrupted. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people died because we didn't want to see our aid stolen. I'm much more concerned about our aid being stolen by terrorists than stolen by economically driven criminals. It's commented that we should somehow prevent Taliban officers from visiting Russia and China. Gee, I don't know how we're supposed to do that. We'd like to believe that the Afghan people share our values, and certainly those Afghans we talk to tend to share our values. But the fact is that in over 20 years, and with all the money that any Afghan could ever imagine on one side, and the ideology of the Taliban on the other, we lost. We are told that we have a moral obligation to the Afghan people. I think we have a moral obligation to everyone in the entire world. But the idea of taking the most generous country in the world, the country who's sent its men and women to die by the thousands to help other countries, has some sort of guilt for its involvement in Afghanistan, from which it derives a moral obligation of the Afghan people greater than that of China or Norway. I think is simply wrong. When we went into Afghanistan, things were terrible, and they had a civil war, and the 90% of Afghanistan women who were under the Taliban were as repressed then as they are now. We didn't break Afghanistan. It was broken when we got there. Now, the Afghan government is seeing hundreds of thousands or perhaps millions of people deported from Pakistan. It has fought a little border skirmish with Iran over water. How does Afghanistan get along with its neighbors?
Thank you for that question. You know, the relationship between Pakistan and the Taliban at the moment is it's not good. The Pakistanis are extremely worried, as they've made clear publicly, about this sharp increase in attacks against their security forces. Just in recent days, there have been senior members of the Taliban that have visited Islamabad and seen senior leadership. You know, I don't have great insight into whether that's a reflection of perhaps actions by the Taliban to crack down on TTP, but this security issue is, I think, dominating the Taliban's relationship with Pakistan, Pakistan's relationship with one of its neighbors. To the north, I'll give you just one example of Uzbekistan. Among the difficult issues that Uzbekistan has in its relationship with the Taliban is over a particular canal that the Taliban are seeking to build in the north that could divert large percentages of the Amu Darya River that supports tens of thousands of Uzbeks as well as Turkmen. So that's one issue. At the same time, the Uzbeks are generously providing electricity that supports the Afghan people. And so is even Tajikistan. And Tajikistan itself, I think, within the region has the most concerns about Taliban activity inside Afghanistan. On Iran, again, you know, the Iranians, like every other country in the region, they have an embassy in Kabul. They have a special envoy. And they probably have steep security concerns as well, particularly in the aftermath of this attack.
Do they fault the Taliban for not controlling anti-Shiite mass murders like those we saw explode a bomb just a few days ago in Iran?
Yes, I think they probably have concerns about, look, I don't want to talk for Iran, but any country that's attacked, I think they would have concerns about the ability of a neighbor to take action to ensure those attacks don't happen.
I've gone way over. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Sherman. We now proceed to Congressman Brian Mast of Florida.
Thank you, Chairman. Taliban, ISIS-K run Afghanistan today?
I would not say that ISIS-K runs Afghanistan today, no.
They run a portion of it. They run as a level of authority in some places.
You know, what we're finding with ISIS-K is they are largely choosing to keep a low profile and then execute attacks in cities as well as outside the country. They're not...
Taliban, yes.
The Taliban, I think, you know, I don't want to step into territory around anything to do with recognition, but...
Taliban runs it enough that we don't want to give money to the Afghan central bank.
I think the Taliban are in control of the Afghan central bank as well as other institutions, yes.
Okay, you familiar with the name Shah Mehrabi?
Yes.
He's one of the 4 board members, one of the co-chairs.
That's correct.
Of the Afghan fund, $3.5
right.
billion. Mm-hmm. Who was in charge of vetting Shah Mehrabi?
So the process that we followed entailed having consistent with the Federal Reserve Act. We certified this person who was put forward by the accredited representative of Afghanistan at the time.
Who put him forward?
The accredited representative of Afghanistan at this time.
Credit representative of Afghanistan?
Accredited representative of
Who's
Afghanistan.
that, the accredited representative of Afghanistan?
I'd be very glad to talk to you in another setting, in a public setting, given, I think, quite legitimate security concerns. I don't want to speak further.
But you don't want to say who the accredited representative of Afghanistan?
I'd be happy to speak with you in a classified setting.
You could just say no. I don't want to answer that. You don't want to say who the accredited representative of Afghanistan is?
I'd be happy to speak with
Just
you in a
say
classified setting.
Don't do the Washington, D.C. BS. Just say no or yes. Was Shah Rabi fired from Mary Washington College for, let's just say, misrepresenting his credentials, saying he was a doctor when he was not?
These allegations we were not aware of.
But just
when this
was he?
process went
Today,
forward.
was he?
It wouldn't have changed our, I think, determination in the end.
It wouldn't have changed your determination to appoint him as a co-chair,
To
elevate
certify,
him from board member
not to
to
appoint, to
co-chair
certify.
of this.
Consistent
Had you
with the Federal
known
Reserve
that
Act,
he
to
was
certify.
fired from a college for saying he was a doctor and he wasn't, that wouldn't have changed. That really goes, I really don't have to ask a lot more because it really goes to the heart of what I wanted to get at of what's going on at State Department about the vetting of individuals. The idea that you would say, yes, we weren't totally aware of what went on with this individual, misrepresenting their credentials, being fired from previous universities, saying that they were a member of an honor society, things that, these are allegations that we haven't asked you about all of them, you haven't confirmed all of them, but you're saying it wouldn't have changed what took place. That's disturbing to me, number one. But it really goes to another question. You said that you acknowledge Taliban runs Afghanistan, or in large part, and certainly has control of the central bank. Shah Rabi is also a board member of the Afghan Central Bank. So what does that say about his connections to the Taliban?
I think our assessment is that he is not under the thumb of or controlled by the Taliban. I mean, he's an American citizen. He teaches at Montgomery College. He's had a decades-long career. That's an advisory position.
He's had a decades-long career and has been fired for misrepresenting his work from the places that he has had careers in. I don't know the entire history of that, and I'd like to hear more about it from you all, perhaps in another setting. But he is a board member of the Afghan Central Bank, on one hand, that you just acknowledged is controlled by the Taliban. So if you want to be a board member there, you got to be in cahoots with the Taliban. You would add up to most people. And we appointed him as a part of this entity in Switzerland, one of 4 people that's going to control $3.5 billion on behalf of the United States of America to determine if this goes back to the Afghanistan Central Bank. That seems moronic to me, and it seems like an absolute conflict of interest. Is he getting paid as a board member of either of those?
No.
He doesn't get paid as a board member of the Afghan Central Bank?
No.
He doesn't get paid as a board member of the Afghan Fund?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, and so to go on just one more time, do you know, was he fired from Washington College?
I saw the allegations that Cigar brought to our attention. We were not aware of them before they were brought to our attention. I haven't talked
My
to
remaining
Washington
second,
College.
thank you. I'm sorry I'm running out of time because I would want to hear from you more. I really don't want to just interrupt you.
No
But
problem.
I do want
Please,
to submit
go
something
ahead.
for the record, Mr. Chairman, and that's this letter from Cigar stating that state did respond to many requests for information for ongoing audits. However, there is a difference between simply responding to the request and providing fulsome answers to our questions. That's directly from Cigar about State Department's response to them and how they are being not cooperative. Please submit that for the record.
Without objection and enthusiastically so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We now proceed. Hey, we're so grateful our newest member, all the way from the Republic of Rhode Island, Gabe Emo.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. Of course, as we know, the conditions in Afghanistan have been brutal since the Taliban took over in August 2021, and they've only worsened. And it is, a terrible note that the dire situation for over 29 million Afghans in need of urgent assistance persists. We must see unhindered access for all humanitarian aid workers to serve vulnerable populations. While it is essential humanitarian aid gets to those populations, it does not address the underlying causes of Afghanistan's deteriorating situation. The Taliban are responsible for the deterioration of the economic and humanitarian situation. It is their responsibility for the recovery of the country and the improvement of their economy. But we must support, where possible, an expanding network to ensure that people have their basic needs met, private sector initiatives can grow, and women empowerment efforts can be fostered. I do, however, want to shift note to a topic that I think, Mr. West, you briefly addressed. The United States must also be a partner in resettling the folks who did so much for our efforts. And this is something, I saw firsthand with Operation Allies Welcome during my time at the White House. We should welcome those who want to be integrated into our society as friends, neighbors, and business owners who can contribute to our economy and rich cultural life. A report from Brown University last year highlighted how some of the refugees who resettled in Rhode Island experience the post-traumatic stress following their hasty exit out of Kabul. But also how they have skills when combined with a command of English can be transferable to our local economy. And so in Providence, I've seen this directly with the Refugee Dream Center, a resettlement organization that has been really impactful. Just in my neighborhood, Beautiful Day, a gourmet granola company that was founded with a mission to help refugees, especially the most vulnerable. Mr. West, at a high level, can you discuss the current assistance provided to help resettled refugees integrate via the efforts in the Office of the Coordinator of relocation efforts?
Thank you very much for that question. As you said, we have an office led by my colleague Mara Tekach at the State Department, exclusively focused on relocations and resettlement. They work very closely with PRM, another piece of the State Department, Population, Refugees, and Migration. It's PRM that deals with resettlement agencies, and we'd be glad to arrange for professionals from PRM to come and talk specifically about assistance that's going to refugees resettling in this country. Top line, though, the effort to help and enable the relocation and resettlement of those who served alongside us over 20 years, that's a personal priority of Secretary Blinken's. It's one that does bleed into my work in engagements with Afghans as well as with the Taliban, and it's one that will continue.
Great. One other question. Could you briefly discuss the travel sanctions that are currently in place on Taliban leadership and how the UN Security Council is reviewing waivers? Specifically, tell me a little bit of why it's in our interest to work within that framework.
Sure. So if we rewind to, say, July of 2022, there had been in place for years what's called a travel ban waiver. That meant that there were about 14 senior Taliban leaders on that list who could travel anywhere they wanted, anytime they wanted, and the countries hosting them didn't have to ask anybody for permission. As a result, really more than anything, of the Taliban's reprehensible decision to bar women from attending secondary school and their refusal to reverse that decision from March of 2022, the UN Security Council made a decision to take that waiver away. From August of 2022 onward, what we've seen is a quite effective and dramatic curtailment of senior leader travel since then. Before that period, from the Taliban's takeover to August of 2022, it was a whole lot of travel by senior leaders. So I think the travel ban has actually been quite effective at keeping Taliban leaders in Afghanistan. There have been instances, as the chairman himself noted in his opening remarks, when a country that wants to engage with a Taliban leader, they need to come to the Security Council, they need to put it in writing. This is the reason this person is coming to our country. This is how long this person will stay. And then the Security Council gets time to review that request. All 15 members, not just the United States. Now, it's a tough call, but the reason that we haven't vetoed is because we don't want to invite a veto by one of our adversaries when we need to see a member of the Taliban leadership around an incredibly important issue, be it terrorism, relocation related, human rights related, a hostage issue that we need to engage upon. And so again, I'd return to saying the travel ban has been effective at dramatically reducing travel by senior leaders, but these requests do come when countries want to engage with a leader, and that's why we've made the decisions we have.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman Almo. We now proceed to Congressman Jim Baird of Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank our witnesses for being here today. You know, Secretary West, I'm going to ask and focus on you at first. In March of 2023, Chairman McCall requested the SIGAR report on several matters related to the U.S. assistance in Afghanistan. And this past Sunday, SIGAR released their findings on the $3.5 billion in the Afghan fund, and they found these four concerns. And so the first one is that over a year since creation, the fund has made no disbursements for activities intended to benefit the Afghan people. Treasury and the state are not currently willing to support the return of these funds to the Afghan Central Bank. So my question is, what is State Department strategy here? And is there a disbursement date? And when was the last time the state talked to the Swiss partners about this fund?
Thank you very much. The activities of the Afghan Fund are very important. I appreciate the question. So on the Board of Trustees to the Afghan Fund, it's four individuals. The American who sits there is the Treasury Department's Undersecretary Jay Shambaugh. So really, it's the Treasury Department that leads on the Afghan Fund. It is correct that there has not been a disbursement. We want to be sure that we have absolutely rock-solid accountability mechanisms in place, so that any disbursement that is made is done so, again, accountably with the correct auditing in place. I'd refer you to Treasury on sort of the exact disbursement-ready status of the Afghan Fund.
Thank you. Ms. Harry, do you, Mary, do you have any thoughts on this issue?
Thank you, but perhaps my colleague at USAID might have something to note.
Mr. Administrator.
Thank you. USAID does not play a role in the Afghan Fund, so we defer to our colleagues at State and Treasury.
I can say a bit more. I mean, look, this fund was set up for two purposes. First, to preserve and protect assets for the benefit of the Afghan people, and second, to make disbursements that would enhance macroeconomic stability in the country. So an example of one such disbursement that we've long considered is paying down on arrears that the state of Afghanistan owes to international financial institutions. So at the World Bank and at the Asian Development Bank both, they have funds called own bank resources that can be drawn upon to meet the basic needs of the Afghan people, to meet humanitarian needs as well. But those funds are inaccessible if these arrears are not paid. Now, I think it's a good thing. We've engaged with members of the Taliban as well as technocrats from the Ministry of Finance, from their so-called central bank. Two payments have been made that have enabled the continuation of efforts to draw upon these own bank resources from these institutions. So it hasn't been necessary to dip into the Afghan Fund for those purposes.
So continuing on, the fund's unanimous vote requirement could help prevent the fund from engaging in risky activity. There are currently no controls in place that specifically address the issue of Taliban diversion. So, however, further safeguards that do address diversion may be developed in the future. The question is, what safeguard has the State Department come up with or working on to ensure that there's no Taliban diversion? We have 54 seconds.
Thank you. I'll be quick. It's a very important question. I think the professionals at the Treasury Department who are focused on this level of granularity around, exactly the mechanisms in place to ensure no diversion if there is a disbursement, they're going to be much better placed than I will to talk about that in detail. I'm very confident that the Treasury Department is focused on that.
Thank you, Congressman Beer. We now proceed to Congressman Jason Crow of Colorado.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the time, and thank you to all of you for your testimony today. As a combat veteran of the Afghanistan war, like many of my colleagues and like many of you here today, we have left pieces of our heart with Afghanistan, and we also know in a very deep and personal way that we can detest the brutality of the Taliban and push back against the Taliban and continue to support resistance to the Taliban, but we can also support the people of Afghanistan, that we are capable of making that distinction and finding ways to make sure we support people that, frankly, over our 20-plus years, learned to love freedom, to yearn for freedom and democracy, an entire generation of Afghans that got a taste for that freedom and will continue to resist. And I feel like we have a lifelong responsibility to support that. And consistent with that, we know from the World Food Program that over 15 million of the Afghan people, many of whom we fought with and for, are food insecure in the last year. 29 million, two-thirds of the population are in some kind of need of humanitarian assistance. But there remains a lot of misinformation and false claims about the level of diversion, right, and the Taliban taking that information. So could you very briefly just paint a high-level picture for the fact that, we know how to do this, right? This is not the first time ever that the United States and our allies provide assistance to people that we have committed to and support, but do so in a way that doesn't support rogue regimes or oppressive regimes that those folks live under. So could you just paint that picture, please, for a moment?
Sure. Thank you very much for that question. Like you, and for the exact same reasons that you have laid out, we also believe that we have an ongoing moral commitment to the people of Afghanistan, and one that is extremely important for us to uphold.
Could you speak up a little bit, please?
Certainly, I will try, and I apologize for my creaky voice at times. On this question of diversion, as I laid out in my opening statement, we take these questions to be extraordinarily seriously, because we believe that it is absolutely critical that we make sure that our assistance benefits the people of Afghanistan and does not benefit the Taliban. We do that in part through the way in which we design our programs. For example, our agricultural programs work directly with smallhold farmers, and we make sure that the benefit flows to them in their ability to plant crops and bring those crops to market, and so that there is no benefit that goes beyond the individuals and to the Taliban. Beyond that, with our implementing partners, we have rigorous oversight processes and systems in place. We require all of our implementing partners to report to us if there are any allegations about the diversion of funds, and we have seen them take swift actions more than 25 times thus far to suspend assistance when there are concerns, until they and we are able to make sure that those concerns are fully addressed.
Thank you, Mr. Schiffer. I have one more question. I appreciate we could talk a lot about this, but we all know that there are many checks, and we go directly to the people in instances like this. And we have lots of partners and lots of capability to do that, because this is not the first time we've done it. Ms. Amiri, to you, there is this oftentimes this false impression that providing humanitarian aid will support oppressive regimes. But what we actually know is that oppressive regimes oppress, right? That is what they do. In that when people actually have food, when they have security, when they have resources, they're more able to resist oppression. So you have the amazing work of amazing job of helping support the Afghan women and girls. Could you tell me how those resources help those women and girls resist and continue to pursue freedom?
Thank you very much for that question. I think one issue that we lose sight of is Afghan women are embedded in society. They are not separate from it. So what the humanitarian assistance that we provide, it's the population that is in most need of it is most vulnerable. They're women and children. Of the population that is most at risk for food insecurity, it's women and children. In fact, when you look at the numbers, it's over 70% go to women and children. And the conversations that I have with Afghan women and girls, they are desperate. They have lost everything overnight. And what they struggle with is not just the fact that they've lost their voice. Many of the mothers that I speak to, the women that I speak to, they note that that one of the things that they most struggle with is that the fact that they don't know how they're going to feed their children.
And thank you, Congressman Crow. We now proceed to Congressman Tim Burchett from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kind of in the middle here. Is it possible to provide aid to Afghanistan without that aid benefiting the Taliban?
We believe it is, and we believe that we do so, and we believe that we have systems in place to make sure that that assistance is going directly to the Afghan people. And I offer that without any illusions about just how difficult an operating environment it is.
It's funny you say that because the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction has said it is impossible to provide aid without benefiting the Taliban. So I'm a little worried that the U.S. aid is making its way to the Taliban, and you're telling me that's not happening.
I'm telling you that we have very, very rigorous processes in place to make sure that none of our assistance is diverted. When we have concerns, as I was just mentioning earlier, we work with our implementing partners to take swift action. We have been willing to suspend assistance to make sure that any of those concerns are addressed, precisely because we share your concerns that the Taliban does not benefit from our program.
Of that aid sent to Afghanistan, how much do you think is paid? Is just paid to the Taliban for taxes, fees, rent, and other bills? Is there any? Is that being tracked?
It is being tracked, and I would offer that there is a distinction between aid diversion and things like payment of utility bills. And just for an example, for the midwives that we seek to support in Afghanistan, they need running water. They need electricity to be able to deliver healthy babies. We would not suggest to our implementing partners that they not pay their utility bills.
I appreciate that. Would it surprise you that Cigar polled 37 NGOs, that's non-government organizations, and they found $10.1 million tax dollars that were paid to the Taliban? And, you know, they just polled 37, and from my perusal, there's literally hundreds of those. So that's kind of contradicting what you all are saying. I'm really concerned what's going on with your organization.
Well, I would offer, sir, and we're happy to come up and talk to you about this in more detail. And we have certainly talked to Cigar about this, that in arriving at that $10.1 million figure, they amalgamated a number of different categories. I would not consider, for example, the payment of utility bills to be a support for the Taliban in the ways that I know concern you and concern us.
Well, so I'm just a little confused. One group's saying it doesn't, you're telling me it doesn't exist. The other body is saying it does. I'm glad that we passed a bill at the end of last year that's supposed to require the State Department to track this number and report it to Congress. I'm hoping that the President sees fit to sign that into law. It sure does send a conflicting message out. Are y'all comfortable with the partnership between the Taliban and China?
So look, the Chinese are pursuing a very different policy from the United States vis-a-vis Afghanistan. They still have an embassy operating. They're leaning pretty far forward in terms of business activities. But from what we can tell, the sort of flash of the commitment you hear from Beijing, there's not great data to back it up around sort of a major, huge BRI or CPEC play in Afghanistan.
Well, last year the Chinese inked a $1.5 billion oil deal with the Taliban. What's the State Department doing about that to combat that influence?
We don't see Afghanistan as a place where we need to compete with the Chinese and the Russians. You know, as for this particular deal, I'd be happy to follow up, but I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, real quickly, has an implementing partner ever been harmed as a result of y'all providing cigar information? Simple yes or no. I'm out of time.
Yeah, no, and apologies about that. I would like to come back and talk to you about this question in a separate setting, precisely because we don't want to create additional risk for any of our partners or for the Afghan people.
Thank you, Congressman Bartsch. We now proceed to Congressman
Mr. Chairman, I would ask the chair to make that happen. We've got a lot of questions that can't seem to be answered, and at some point Congress needs to know. We are. As the Constitution tells us, we're over this, and we should be, I think we should be exercising our ability. If not, I think we ought to start cutting some funds, which is long overdue.
I agree with all the above. We'll proceed. Congressman Mike Lawler of New York.
Mr. West and Mr. Schiffer, in Saigar Sopko's reports and in his testimony to this committee, he documented several ways in which the Taliban has been diverting and stealing humanitarian aid. Do you have any reason to believe that he is lying in his testimony or his reports?
I will offer from a USAID perspective that we certainly don't have any reason to believe that he is lying. I think we have questions which we're talking to him about the analysis that underlies that we have not yet seen, and making sure that we're drawing the distinctions between diversion.
Reclaim my time, Mr. West.
You know, it's clear that there have been instances of reports of diversion, of reports of the Taliban trying to interfere in aid delivery, and when that happens, as the
I asked a simple
administrator
question. Do you have any reason to believe he's lying? Yes or no?
Yeah, I would say the same thing as Assistant Administrator Schiffer. We're in close touch with SIGAR about the methodology behind that reporting, but no, I do not have reason to believe.
I'm going to ask you two yes or no questions, and please actually try to stick to that. Yes or no, have you seen any evidence of the Taliban demanding payoffs to permit the implementation of aid projects? Yes or no?
And I do apologize. I'm happy to have a fuller discussion in a separate
Mr. West?
setting.
Yes or no?
I'd be happy to have a conversation with you in a separate setting.
Yes or no, have you seen evidence of the Taliban diverting aid to preferred populations such as Taliban fighters and family members? Yes or no?
Well, with all due respect, we've seen...
No, you're showing no respect to this committee, but please, yes or no? I'm asking you very simple, basic questions. It's yes or no.
We've seen attempts.
You've seen attempts. Okay. Yes or no, Mr. West?
We've likewise seen attempts, and I'm aware of several instances in which our implementing partners have fully ceased operations, in some cases in entire provinces.
Okay. Yes or no, have you seen evidence of the Taliban pressuring the UN and other NGOs to hire Taliban members, relatives, and allies?
I will say again, we've seen attempts.
Same.
Yes or no, have you seen evidence of the Taliban pressuring the UN and other NGOs to issue contracts to Taliban-affiliated companies?
I have not personally seen that. I have heard that there have been attempts to do that as well.
Same.
Yes or no, have you seen evidence of the Taliban pressuring the UN and other NGOs to partner with Taliban-affiliated NGOs?
Again, I know that there have been attempts.
Same here.
Yes or no, have you seen evidence of the Taliban embedding intelligence officials in UN agencies to supervise their work, facilitate interference and diversion, and censor reporting about it?
On that one, I have no knowledge.
On that one, in my case, no.
Yes or no, have you seen evidence of the Taliban collecting taxes and other fees from UN and U.S.-funded implementing partners?
Depending upon what constitutes other fees, yes.
I agree with my colleague.
Okay. So certainly through testimony that this committee has received, we have established that the Taliban have benefited from the aid that we send to Afghanistan. Mr. West, this past November, Saigar Sopko testified that he has been trying to meet with you since you were appointed 2.5 years ago. He has met with every special representative for Afghanistan since 2012, but it wasn't until after Sopko testified publicly about your refusal to meet that you finally agreed to a meeting last week. Why did it take you 2.5 years and congressional testimony for you to finally meet with the Special Inspector General?
I was glad to have the opportunity. The State Department respects the role that Saigar plays in the oversight of Afghanistan policy, and we had, I think, a candid and productive exchange that I hope will continue.
That's not what I asked you. I asked you, why did it take you 2.5 years?
I was glad to have the opportunity to sit down with Mr. Sopko. I think we need to do so more often.
A lot faster than 2.5 years?
You know, when decisions are made about whether to meet with an oversight body, it is a conversation that I have together with the leadership of the State Department. And when we had those discussions, we didn't feel it was appropriate at the time.
But given his testimony before this committee, given his reports, given the contradiction between some of the things that you have testified to and what he has said, wouldn't you think it would actually behoove you to quickly get to the bottom of the discrepancies between you and he on what is actually happening with the Taliban?
You know, I think at the outset of the administration, our sense was that Saigar's role was to oversee reconstruction activities. We're completely out of the reconstruction activities. What we're doing is to meet the basic needs, humanitarian needs of Afghanistan. I think, you know, we've had a time to reflect on the kind of relationship we want with Saigar. Deputy Secretary Verma had, I think, a productive meeting with him back in June. We're on the cusp of arriving at so-called enhanced protocols for the treatment of sensitive information that Saigar authorities want access to. And so my engagement with him, likewise, is an effort to improve our relationship and a reflection.
I would just note, Mr. Chairman, before concluding, bureaucracy is a lot less important than figuring out whether or not the Taliban is benefiting from U.S. taxpayer money. And I would hope that moving forward, the nonsensical bureaucracy and discussions about what kind of relationship we have is a lot less important than dealing with the actual issue of whether or not the Taliban is using U.S. taxpayer money to fund their operations.
Thank you very much, Congressman Lawler, and it's very appropriate we have cleanup now with Congressman Scott Perry of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being here. I'm wondering what's the end goal? How long are we going to be in Afghanistan providing all this aid? What's the plan? Can you codify that in one sentence? Are we there forever, or what are we doing?
You know,
what's our mission?
We're dealing with a really tough environment in which to protect American interests. Our goal is to protect the American people, first and foremost, to secure the release of American hostages, and multiple Americans, as I said at the outset, are still
I get that.
Still there. We want to continue relocation and resettlement operations. Thankfully, those are continuing.
Okay, so that apparently costs a lot of money. The strategic national security interest, can you talk to me, can you talk to us about that? I mean, Are we hoping that Afghanistan is a bulwark against Iran? What's the national strategic security interest that it costs us billions of dollars to be there? I'm trying to figure that out, because what I feel like is that we got in a fight with a bully. We lost the fight. We got punched in the face. He took our lunch money, and now we just keep on paying the lunch money in hopes that he doesn't beat us up again. So tell me the national security interest here.
You know, I'm sure you've seen the same reports I have. Brown University estimates we spent over $2 trillion in Afghanistan
it's
over
gone.
20 years.
We're not getting it back,
so
right? We don't think we're getting it back,
The investment that we're making now is radically, by many, many factors, more modest.
I get that. We're not over there occupying the country, but that doesn't tell me what the national. Are we trying to somehow safeguard the $2 trillion investment that we spent in Afghanistan? Is that what you're telling me?
You know, I'm going to revert to our national interests. And
sir, you're the guy. It says right here, you're the Deputy Assistant Secretary. They sent you, so you should know this. What is our national security? Can you describe it for anybody?
Our national interest in Afghanistan is to ensure it never again becomes a safe haven for
It is.
terrorists.
It's a terrorist superstate, brother. Are you kidding me?
That's not our assessment.
It's not your assessment, but it's reality. Can you talk to me in the remaining time about the security chief of Kandahar and the Taliban Intelligence for Foreign Service, or whatever they call him, his last name? There's 3 last names here, I guess. Abdul Rashid Munib. Anything you know about him traveling to North Korea in pursuit of nuclear weapons technology and cooperation?
No.
Are you aware of it?
Absolutely not.
You don't know anything about it, so that's a false claim.
I've not heard of it. I'm happy to talk to you about it.
Please do.
I'm curious where you're getting that report.
Okay, it's been widely reported on open source. What about their interest in taking nuclear weapons from Pakistan, the Taliban?
I've seen no indication that they haven't.
And you've heard no reporting to the same either?
No.
Okay, so you will run that down. You will run that down, and you will report back to us in the classified setting that apparently we're going to have.
I have doubts about whether it exists, but I'm happy to take a look.
Okay, I hope you do. All right, and I'll give you my information when you give me yours at that time. Let me ask you this. We had a conversation a little while ago where we were talking about people from the Taliban traveling, and you kind of implied that there was an agreement that they were restricted from travel except for the Doha portion where they were given a waiver, right, because they wanted to go travel and work out the arrangements, right, of the American withdrawal in Doha, right? So the Taliban leaders were allowed to travel during that period of time. But the waiver expired. We didn't take it from them. The waiver expired. So right now they're prohibited from travel. And you're the guy. You're the guy for this administration. So can you tell us why the United States voted 15 times? The waiver expired in 2022. In 2023, the U.S. voted 15 times to grant waivers to sanctioned Taliban members. Why did we do that?
Because we see as a part of an overall strategy of engaging all Afghans, and that includes the Taliban, in order to protect our interests. We see it as in our interests.
So it's in our interest to let terrorists travel to places like North Korea or wherever else they want to travel.
To occasionally meet with senior members of the Taliban in order to talk about issues to do with fulfillment of their security commitments, the release of American hostages.
So let me ask you in the remaining time about the release of American hostages. We're paying them billions of dollars. This poor slob, this poor guy, Ryan Corbett. I don't know if his family's here or whatever. What are we doing to leverage the billions of dollars to Afghanistan to get this poor guy out? And, you know, this lady up here asked this poor woman here what she's doing about depression and mental health. This is a terrorist superstate with a regime that is criminal and terrorist and act like animals, like she can do something about that. What are we leveraging the billions of dollars to get this guy out, to get the other people out, and to ameliorate the circumstances of women and children in that country? What are we doing to leverage that?
So you talk about leverage. The kind of normalization that the Taliban seek, it's about sanctions relief. 135 Taliban members are still subject to 1988 sanctions. That includes an asset freeze and a travel ban. They want a normal relationship with international financial institutions. They want the return of $9 billion in assets that are located outside of Afghanistan. They want to seat their permanent representative in New York. They also want diplomatic accreditation. All of that is off the table until they stop taking American hostages, until they get girls back in school at the secondary level and the university level, allow women to participate in public life, and until they take additional steps that would give us greater confidence they take their security commitments seriously.
Sir, I appreciate your answer. I got to tell you, it's hard for me to remain calm here. I don't know how to tell you this, but people in hell want ice water. And the Taliban's not going to do any of that stuff because they don't have to. They have what they want. Plus, they have billions of dollars from the United States that just keep coming in while they keep doing all those things. I yield.
No. Thank you very much, Congressman Perry. As we conclude, indeed, as we just saw with the excellent concerns of Congressman Perry, we've established in this hearing that the Taliban Secretary West are benefiting from U.S. tax dollars. And this needs to be put in the context of Anna Corbett, whose husband is a hostage in Afghanistan. And indeed, her tax dollars are being used to fund her husband's captors. That is just so inexcusable, and we will proceed with a further backup hearing. And at this time, I do appreciate the witnesses being here and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions which will be provided, and we would like for you to respond in writing. And pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitations. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.